Let's talk about one of the fundamental concepts behind Express. It is routing, and this will happen in any application that you're working on. Essentially, when people go to a URL, you need to do stuff. You need to query the database, you need to filter through a list of stores, you need to modify that data in some way. And finally, once you have all of the data that you want to send to the user, you send it to them. So the way that the router works in Express is that you import Express. Then you grab the router off of Express. That's how we've done it here. We'll talk more about these importing and exporting in future videos. And then you go ahead and define all of your routes. Now, I'm defining all of our routes in index.js. And you can see that we're using those routes because if we go and look for index, here we go, const routes equals require. Here, what we're doing is we're importing our routes from this file here, and we're exporting the router from there. And then we go ahead and tell Express to use that right here. So we say anytime someone goes to / anything, then we will hit this routes file. And the routes file here is going to handle every single URL hit that we get. Now, you could have multiple route handlers here. You could have a second one. Sometimes I'll do a second file for admin, and I'll make that like admin routes. And then any routes that go to / admin / anything we'll handle in that separate router. But here we're going to do it all in one file here. And this is how the router works. You get the URL, and then you have a callback function that will run whenever somebody visits that specific URL. That function is going to give you three things. The request, which is an object full of information that's coming in. You have response, which is an object full of methods for sending data back to the user. And then we have a third one that's going to be called next, and we're going to review that in our middleware file, because it's possible that you do not want to send data back at this route, where you just want to sort of pass it off to somebody else to handle. So here we have our function here. If you've never seen this is just a normal function, but I've swapped it out with an arrow function. But if you've taken the ES6 class, you know all about that. And then we immediately just send back, hey, it works. But we can do a lot more work in here. You can console log, hey. Now, when you refresh this, it's still the same. But if we were to go to our terminal here, you'll see that we've console logged, hey. So that means that anytime you console.log inside of an Express application, you're going to see it in your actual terminal here. So we see, hey. Now, what can we do with this? Obviously, we can do request.send. Send is one of the methods that we can possibly use to send data. We can also use it to send JSON back. So let's say you have an object. So const Wes equals, you have a name, it's Wes, age is 100, a cool is a Boolean of true. And I want to send that data back as JSON because maybe we're making a cool API. So what we do is we take that variable, we comment out this request.send. So make sure that you're never trying to send data more than once. So if I was going to say request, and the method we want here is JSON, response.json, Wes. Now we're trying to send data twice, and you're going to get an error that says headers are already sent because you've already sent the request. So if you ever get that error, that's because you've tried to send data to the browser twice. So take that one out. We're going to JSON that. And now when you refresh, you'll see that the browser has sent us back, and it's populated all the correct headers and everything, and it's formatted it as actual JSON. I'm using a little Chrome plugin here, JSON formatter, to highlight my JavaScript, but it has been pushed as JSON, which we're going to do a lot in this course. We're going to be able to push out data as JSON, and then on the client side, we're going to be able to use AJAX to request that actual data. So request.send and request.json are the two most basic ones, but we can also do a little bit more here where we can pull in data from the URL. So let's say we are on this URL here, and I had some query parameters like name equals Wes, ampersand, age equals 100, and I had to hit enter. How do I get the data that's in the URL? Well, that's part of the request. So we can get that data by, let's comment out this stuff again. We could say request or response.send, and the data is available on request.query. And then the actual parameter that we want. So name. So let's see if we can get that. There we go. So now, because the name is Wes, it's going to send West. And if I change that to Kate, obviously going to change to Kate. You could also take the response.json and simply just send back the data immediately. So request.query is an object full of all the query parameters, and we just pass that directly to JSON. So now any of the data that gets passed is automatically just echoed back in JSON. Age equals 100 and cool equals true. And you see that we're just echoing the data back to it. So that is request.query. That gives us all of the data. And the reason why we have this query property on a request is if we head back to app.js, I said that we would sort of like go back to this app.js whenever we're using. You'll see on line 27, 28-ish, you'll see bodyparser.json and bodyparser.url in code. So what this is allowing us to do, this is a concept called middleware, which we're going to run into in just a couple of videos. And what that does is before we even hit these routes right here, what Express is going to do is it's going to check the URL and it's going to check if anyone has posted data from like a form element or something like that. And it's going to sort of put all the data in the request so we can easily access it via saying things like request.query or request.body. Or let's talk about a third one, which is request.params. Let's make a new route here. Router.get, and let's just say reverse /. Now I want to make an endpoint here where you hit a URL and then you say reverse /Wes, and it will give you Sue. It will like reverse whatever your name is. So how do we put like variables in a route? Well, the way you do that is you put a colon and then you put a name. And that's going to give us a name variable on each of our requests. So we can run a function here. So we have our request, we have a response. And from that, let's just test that it's working. So we'll say response.send, it works. Now go to your URL here, and our route was /reverse /Wes. And it says it works. Good. Now, how do I access this part of the URL, Wes? Well, that's stored in the request, obviously, because again, all of the data about our request is stored in the request variable, and we can just try to send it back immediately. So request.params, because that will be an object containing all of it, because you could have multiple name, like last name and like cool, etc., etc. But we just have name, request.params.name. Let's see if we can send that back. Oh, we got a bit of an error here. So if you ever see this, like it's not working, what that means is that your Express application is in the process of restarting. So if you try to refresh too quickly, it means it hasn't restarted totally. But if it doesn't restart ever, you have to go back to your console here and see like maybe there was a syntax error or something like that, and it will give you some information about that happening here. So refresh, it will tell me Wes. If I give it Kate, if I give it race car, you'll see that it's all working. Cool. So what we could do is make a little endpoint here that would simply take in a name and reverse it. So we say const reverse is equal to, and we're going to split that string. So request.params.name. We're going to make that into an array. If you're wondering what this is, check my ES6 videos. We are going to reverse that array and then join it back together. So then we take the reverse that we have here and just send it. So now if I type in Wes, do we get Sue? Yes, we do. Type in Kate, Tiak, I love you, you, or race car. It should still say race car. Good. So we learned a couple things here. Request has all the information. Response has all the methods for sending data back. And we have request.query to get the query parameters. We have something called request.body, which we'll be using for posted parameters. And then we have request.params in order to access the things that are in the URL. All of this stuff is in the Express documentation. So if you need to look it up or you want to see what else there is, go to the Express docs. In the sidebar, you're going to see the request, the response, and you can open that up. You can see all the information. See, here we go. They have a param called ID, request.params.id. You can see, go to response, and you can see all the different methods that live on response. You open it up. Here we go. So request.json, JSON P, links, location, redirect. If you want to redirect someone to a new page, render. That's coming up in the next video. You could send a file. You could set a status, etc., etc. There's all kinds of good stuff here. But in general, you're going to be using response.json and something called response.render, which we're going to hit in the next video.